file I inherited was 41 pages and smelled, metaphorically, of someone leaving in a hurry. My predecessor, senior researcher Vethori, had been at the Vethori Interspecies Behavioral Institute for 11 years. He had authored 17 peer-reviewed monographs, chaired 2 assessment panels, and been shortlisted for the Peleth Prize in Comparative Cognition 4 years running. When he stepped back from the human subject study at the end of week 2, he cited personal scheduling conflicts in his transfer note and did not list a forwarding address for questions. He left no debriefing. He left no summary. He left 41 pages of raw contact logs, a single flagged entry dated day 11, and a sticky notation on the front cover that said, in his neat handwriting, "Proceed with caution. This is not a routine case." I was 26 days out of my postgraduate placement. I had published 1 paper. I had never led a primary behavioral assessment. The file because no one else in the annex would. I want to be precise about that, because the board has asked me twice whether I was assigned to the study, and the honest answer is no. I was available. The human subject was here. The study clock was running. Someone had to continue the contact log, and everyone who had read Vethori's 41 pages had found something important to do elsewhere. I am telling you this not to seek sympathy, but because the context is germane to my findings. A senior researcher with 11 years of experience and 17 monographs walked away from this study at day 14 and did not say why. I walked in at day 15 with 1 published paper, and I am standing before you now at day 42, and I will tell you everything I found. The human's name was Rhea Voss. She was a xenoarchaeological survey coordinator for a Sicilian research consortium operating in the Peleth Fringe. She had been detained during a routine transit inspection when her was found to be carrying 2 pieces of pre-compact cultural material of disputed provenance, not weapons, not intelligence material, not contraband in any functional sense. Items whose paperwork was ambiguous enough that she could be held under Article 19 of the Interspecies Transit Compact while provenance review was conducted. The review was expected to take 4 to 6 weeks. She had been told this. She understood it. She did not protest, did not request advocate representation, and in the intake interview said, in a flat and pleasant tone, that she has a portable data archive and a preference for natural light if it could be arranged, and that she supposed she would keep herself busy. She was 34 years old. She was of medium height for a human female, with the kind of physical economy I have since come to understand is characteristic of humans who spend extended time in confined field environments. People who have learned to take up exactly the space they need and no more. Her hair was dark, kept short. Eyes were the color of shallow water over dark stone, which I note because it is the detail I found hardest to stop noticing, and I want the board to understand that I am aware of what that means about me, and I will address it in full. I did not meet her on day 15. First contact with the subject was conducted at a remove. I sat in the monitoring station adjacent to her quarters and read Vethori's contact logs from the beginning, and I watched the behavioral archive footage while I read, matching each entry to the footage timestamp. I wanted to walk the board through that process as I experienced it, because the accumulation is the point. The horror of this study is not a single moment. It is a tide. Day 1, intake. The footage of the intake officer, guard technician Vethori, running the standard induction protocol. He is brisk, professional, and borderline dismissive. Not unkindly, but efficiently. He is a 17-year veteran of the facility's security detail, with a clean record and no noted behavioral anomalies in his personal file. The human Voss receives the induction with her hands clasped lightly in front of her and her attention focused on his face. 2 questions during the rights and procedures briefing. The first is whether the food allotment can be adjusted for dietary specification. She is not vegan, she explains, but she has a mild intolerance to certain grain proteins, and a list if that would help. The second question is whether Vethori has worked at the facility long, because the ventilation tone in this section of the annex is different from the transit corridor. And she is curious whether that is a design feature, a maintenance artifact. Vethori pauses for 1.4 seconds. He says it is a design feature. He says it has to do with air handling capacity for this wing's filtration load. She says that is interesting. She says she had assumed it was a resonance effect from the structural ribs. She had noted those in the corridor, but that makes more sense. He says, after another pause, that it is actually a combination of both. If she wants the full explanation, she says she does. He explains it. 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage. A guard technician who has never in 17 years deviated from the intake protocol by a single exchange, explaining the ventilation architecture of a detention annex to a civilian transit hold. Vethori has annotated this in the log. The annotation says, minor deviation from protocol. Monitor, day 3. Voss has been provided with her portable data archive. She is working at the small desk in her quarters, referencing what appear to be survey maps. Night shift support technician Orveth Gann arrives to deliver the evening meal tray. He is 22 years old, new to the facility, and has been on the night rotation for 11 days. He sets the tray down. She thanks him. He turns to leave. She asks, without looking up from her work, whether he has had a chance to look at anything in the Pelith Fringe Survey region. Yet, because she has some maps she has been annotating, and she would be happy to share them if he has any interest in comparative spatial data. He says he has not, actually. He says he did some coursework in spatial survey methodology before he took this posting. She looks up at that. She looks directly at him. The footage is good quality. I have watched this moment 47 times. There is nothing manipulative in it. There is no performance, no calculation, no predatory assessment. Her face simply opens. There is no better word for it. She looks at him the way I later came to understand. Humans look at things they find genuinely interesting. Not things they find useful, not things they are evaluating for advantage, but things they find intrinsically worth attending to. Like light through a window, like a clean answer to a question she had been carrying for a while. She says, "You did coursework in spatial survey methodology?" He says yes. She pushes her chair back from the desk, makes a slight gesture at the second chair, the standard issue fabrication chair positioned for guest accommodation in detainee quarters, and says, "Sit down. I want to show you something I found in the Vethori ridge maps." He sits down. He is there for 49 minutes. Vethori's annotation says, extended contact beyond protocol. Night shift technician Orveth Gann to be rotated. Flag for supervisor review. The rotation was never implemented. I found no record of the supervisor review. Day 5. The station's medic, Sethoff Palt, conducts the standard weekly health assessment. This is routine. 15 minutes. Biometric scan, standard questionnaire, notation filed. She and Voss are in the assessment room for 1 hour and 17 minutes. The footage shows them spending the first 14 minutes on the assessment itself, which Voss completes without incident, and the remaining 63 minutes discussing a paper Sethoff Palt has apparently mentioned in passing, a recent longitudinal study on metabolic rates in species undergoing long-duration transit stress. Voss has not read the paper. She has read adjacent material. She asks questions about the methodology. Sethoff Palt answers them. At 51 minutes into the overtime, Sethoff Palt says she has been wrestling with a particular measurement problem in a side project she has been running on endocrine response curves in mixed species crew environments, and she does not expect Voss to have relevant expertise. Voss is clearly comfortable with the survey literature, and she wonders. Voss has already opened her data archive. They work on it together for the last 12 minutes of the session. Sethoff Palt leaves with 3 citations she had not had before, and a note that Voss has offered to review her raw measurement schema if Sethoff Palt would like a second set of eyes. Vethori's annotation says, Medic Sethoff Palt exceeded session boundary, scheduled for protocol review. Flag for supervisor. I found no record of the protocol review. Day 7. Vethori. The intake guard technician, who explained the ventilation system on day 1, has begun stopping by Voss's quarters during his shift transitions, not in his official capacity, not on any scheduled contact protocol, but informally, the way a person stops by a colleague's workspace. He spends between 4 and 11 minutes each time. Footage shows them talking about various things. The humidity differential between this wing and the administrative corridor, a survey paper she is reading, a dispute she is apparently following in the professional xenoarchaeological literature about dating methodology for Compact artifact strata. He has no background in xenoarchaeology. She explains the dispute to him. He asks a question about it that, I will note, actually perceptive. She says so. Not as a performance. She says it the way you say it when someone surprises you pleasantly. Without fanfare, without strategy, without trying to make them feel good. She says it because it is true. He asks 2 more questions. She answers them. He leaves for his shift. At the door, he pauses and says he will check on the humidity reading in the east corridor, because she mentioned last time that the differential might be a secondary effect of the cold water pipe routing, and he wants to see if she is right. She appreciates it. Dovethseln's annotation says, Guard Verathon demonstrating inappropriate familiarity with detainee. Mend reassignment to non-contact duties. I found no record of the reassignment. Day 9. I want to slow down here, because Day 9 is where Dovethseln's single-flagged entry lives, and I want you to understand exactly what he flagged, and exactly what he chose, not to flag alongside it. The flagged entry concerns maintenance technician Rovethseln, no relation to my predecessor. It is a common suffix cluster in our naming convention, who is responsible for the environmental systems in the Annex's eastern wing. He has had no scheduled contact with Voss. He is not on any contact protocol. His work brings him through the detainee quarter corridor once a week for an approximately 4-minute systems check. On Day 9, according to the footage, he is running his check when Voss, whose quarters open on that corridor, glances up from her desk and says good afternoon. He says good afternoon. She says she has been meaning to ask. She noticed on her 3rd morning that the temperature in her quarters runs approximately 1.8 degrees warmer than the corridor, and she is curious whether that is the room's thermal mass retaining heat from the daytime panel lighting, or whether there is a heating element she has not located. He stops. He is a maintenance technician. Approximately no one has ever asked him a question like this. He is quiet for 2.1 seconds, and then explains that it is the panel lighting, mostly, but there is also a secondary radiant source in the floor substrate beneath the east-facing wall, because this section of the annex was retrofitted, and the substrate insulation is thinner on that side. She says, oh, she had assumed it was panel-related, but she had not thought about the substrate. He says most people do not think about the substrate. She says she finds infrastructure genuinely interesting. She says she spent 3 months on a survey posting where the temporary habitat's thermal management was so poorly designed that she and her team had developed 3 workarounds just to sleep, and she has had a perhaps unhealthy preoccupation with how spaces manage heat ever since. He laughs. It is brief, a single exhaled note, and then he seems to catch himself, and he is quiet for a moment. Then, he says the east wall substrate issue has actually been on his maintenance queue for 14 months, and the parts request keeps getting deprioritized. And if she is interested, he can show her the sensor data for that wall, because it is honestly a more interesting problem than it sounds. She says she would like that very much. He pulls up the sensor data on his portable maintenance terminal. They look at it together for 11 minutes in the doorway of her quarters. Dovethseln flagged this entry. His notation says, detainee demonstrating social bridging behavior with non-contact staff. Potential manipulation vector. Recommend full contact restriction. He did not flag Verathon. He did not flag Orvithgan. He did not flag Sedov Palt. He flagged Rovethseln, the maintenance technician, apparently because Rovethseln's was the one who should not have been talking to her at all, the one whose contact was most easily characterized as a breach, rather than a protocol deviation by staff who were supposed to be there. I sat with that for a long time. I think Dovethseln was frightened by Day 9, and I think he was frightened in a particular way. The way you are frightened when you realize you already named a pattern, that it is too late to pretend it is not there, and that understanding it fully will cost you something you do not want to pay. He flagged Rovethseln. He left the rest alone. 3 days later, he cited scheduling conflicts and did not leave a forwarding address. I understand him. I want the board to know that I understand him completely. I am not here to criticize his choice. I am here because someone had to make a different one. I met Rhea Voss for the first time on Day 17. I should have waited longer. I know that now. I should have completed a full review of all contact logs through day 16 before initiating direct contact, and I should have done it with a dedicated monitoring protocol and a structured interaction framework and a colleague present. I did none of these things because I had read 12 days of contact logs by that point, and I had a behavioral question that the logs alone could not answer, and I had, without noticing it happening, become genuinely curious about her. I want to be precise. I was not drawn to her in the sense of attraction. I was drawn to her in the sense that the logs kept showing me someone whose behavior I could not fit into any existing category, and my discipline's central vice is the compulsion to understand things that do not fit. She was not manipulating people. I had examined that hypothesis thoroughly by day 15. None of the behavioral markers of calculated social manipulation were present. There was no strategic sequencing. She did not identify high-value targets and approach them first. She did not vary her approach based on apparent leverage. She did not calibrate her disclosures to maximize reciprocal disclosure. She was simply, at every interaction, genuinely interested in the person she was talking to. The guard technician, the night shift support worker, the medic, the maintenance technician. She was equally interested in all of them, with the same quality of attention, the same easy candor, same particular kind of focus that I can only describe as the opposite of performance. The question I brought to our first meeting was, does she know she is doing it? I sat down across from her at the small desk. She had offered me the second chair with the same slight gesture I had watched her offer it to Orvith Gann 12 days earlier, and I explained that I was the new lead researcher on her behavioral assessment file, and that I had some questions if she was willing. She said she was willing. She asked my name. I told her. She said, Sovet Keln. Is that a 3-part or 2-part name in your system? Because she was still learning the naming convention structures for the different species on the station, and she did not want to default to an assumption. I told her it was 2-part. I told her, because she had asked, that the hyphenated form is a lineage marker, and that the second element refers to a specific ancestral occupational designation, and that in contemporary usage, it is purely nominal, but that in older usage, it would have told you something about a person's family's historical role. She said that was fascinating. She said that in many human cultures, pre-industrial names had exactly that function, and that some contemporary surnames still carry those occupational fossils, if you know how to read them. I had not planned to discuss naming conventions. I had a structured question list. I sat there with my structured question list, and we talked about naming conventions for 14 minutes, and I did not stop us because I was genuinely interested in what she was saying, and she was genuinely interested in what I was saying, and it was the easiest conversation I had had in 2 years. And that fact, which I recorded in my own contact log that evening, is the most important data point in this entire study. I will tell you about the structural finding first, and then I will tell you about myself, because the structural finding is what the board commissioned, and my own case is the supporting evidence. Across days 1 through 16, Voss had formed sustained, voluntary, materially affecting social bonds with 5 individuals at this facility. I will describe each bond and its effects. Vethori, the intake guard technician. By day 16, Vethori had begun spending an average of 8 additional minutes per shift in the vicinity of Voss's quarters, under the nominal cover of extended perimeter checks. He had provided her with 2 items not on the approved accommodation list: an additional illumination panel, requested on the grounds of her stated preference for natural light, and a specific calibrated humidity reading for her section of the corridor, which he had obtained by running a non-standard diagnostic on day 7 and repeated on days 10 and 14. He had not falsified any records. He had not violated any security protocol in a material sense. He had simply incrementally begun doing slightly more for her than his job required, in ways that were too small to trigger any automatic flag and too consistent to be coincidental. In his standard shift-end behavioral self-reports, which are mandatory for all security staff, he described his assigned detainee as cooperative and presenting no behavioral concerns. He added, in his day 14 report, that she had correctly identified the cause of a humidity anomaly in the east corridor that had been on the environmental Q for 11 months. Orvith Gann, the night shift support technician. By day 16, Orvith Gann had spent a cumulative 3 hours and 42 minutes in direct social contact with Voss, all of it outside any scheduled protocol. He had brought her, on 4 occasions, minor supplementary food items available from the staff common facility, not as a bribe or a trade, not in response to any request, but because she had mentioned on day 4 that the evening grain portion was difficult for her system, and he had, as he later reported to me, simply started keeping an eye out for things she might find more manageable. He had shared with her 3 technical papers from his own study archive. She had shared with him annotated sections of 2 survey documents from hers. Performance assessment from this period notes a marked improvement in his shift engagement metrics and a reduction in reported fatigue scores. Setov Palt, the station medic, the most professionally consequential bond of the set. By day 16, Setov Palt had initiated 6 contacts with Voss beyond scheduled protocol, 4 of them under the cover of informal health check-ins, which are technically permissible, but are in practice essentially never used for transit hold detainees. The remaining 2 contacts were notated in the medical log as consultation visits for a research question, is not a category that exists in the transit hold contact protocol, and which Setov Palt had apparently created for her own logging purposes. In those 6 contacts, Setov Palt and Voss had worked together on Setov Palt's endocrine response study. Voss had no formal credentials in xenobiology or metabolic science. She had relevant survey literature knowledge and, apparently, quick mind for methodology. Setov Palt's project notes from this period reflect, in her own words, a level of collaborative momentum she had not experienced since her second-year postgraduate research partnership. She had submitted a revised measurement schema to the Peleth Institute pre-review board. It was accepted within 6 days. Roveth Selm, the maintenance technician, the most unexpected bond and, in retrospect, the most instructive one. Roveth Selm had no sanctioned contact with Voss at all. By day 16, he had stopped at her doorway 4 times, not counting the day 9 encounter, periods ranging from 6 to 19 minutes. On 2 of those occasions, he had shown her updated sensor data from the East Wall substrate project. On 1 occasion, she had suggested a supplementary sensor placement that he had, according to his own maintenance notes, actually implemented, a single wireless contact sensor at the substrate junction point, which cost nothing to install and which had, in his words in those notes, confirmed her hypothesis about the secondary radiant bleed. He had filed the updated data as supporting documentation for his parts request, which had been pending for 14 months. Request was approved 6 days later. He had noted in his private log, maintenance technicians on this station keep personal work logs, which are technically accessible to oversight, but which no one reads, that the transit hold woman had a better instinct for environmental systems, diagnostics than most of the engineering staff he had worked with. Before I give the board that analysis, I want to note 2 more entries from the log, one from day 19 and one from day 24, because they occurred after I had taken over the study and because I documented them in real time, which means they are the only entries in this file that have my handwriting on them, rather than Veth Selm's, and I want the record to be complete. Day 19. I had been in direct contact with Voss twice by this point. I will discuss those sessions in full later, and I was still at that stage, conducting myself as a research observer. I had implemented a contact reduction protocol for the 4 staff members I had identified, restricting Verith Aln and Orvith Gann to essential service contacts only, reminding Setov Palt of her session boundary guidelines in writing, and formally noting in the maintenance log that non-essential corridor contacts for the East Wing should be routed through the standard request system rather than handled by direct stop-in. I thought this was appropriate methodological hygiene. I thought it was also practically working. On day 19, I reviewed the overnight footage. The footage shows senior communications technician Vethori Soren, who is 31 years old, has been stationed at Way Station Peleth Orvath for 6 years, and works a split shift in the primary signals relay room 1 corridor removed from the detainee annex, pausing in the corridor outside Voss's quarters at 0347 station time. He is not by any protocol supposed to be in that corridor at that time. His shift doesn't intersect with the annex circuit. The footage shows him pausing with a thermal container, a personal beverage container, facility issue, and simply standing for a moment as he passes. The door to Voss's quarters is closed. The lights are out. She is asleep. He sets the thermal container on the tray ledge outside the door. It is not contraband. It is a warm infusion of a type that is available in the staff common facility on level 2. The dietary notation on Voss's file, which I had submitted through the food services queue 3 days earlier, specifies that she tolerates certain infusions better than the standard morning grain supplement. That notation is in the internal food services system. Vethori Sorn has no formal access to the food services file. He should not know about it. I checked the station's informal communication logs. The staff relay channel, which is technically monitored, but in practice reviewed only for security incidents. On day 18 at 22:07, Orvith Gann, the night shift technician, had sent a message on the staff channel to no specific recipient that said, "Anyone know if the East Wing Transit hold woman is still getting the grain supplement she can't eat?" Someone should flag that. Vethori Sorn had responded within 4 minutes. He said, "I'll sort it." I had not met Vethori Sorn. Voss had not met Vethori Sorn. He had seen her, presumably in the corridor at some point, or from the staff canteen window that overlooks the annex exercise yard, and heard enough about her, through whatever informal channel transmits these things, to know that she had a dietary issue that was not being handled, and he had decided at 03:47 in the morning on his own time to handle it. He was not in the contact logs. He had never spoken to her. She had bonded him through intermediaries, which is either remarkable or deeply alarming, and I am not certain those two categories are, in this case, distinct. Day 24. Station Security Officer Orvith Dim, who is the oversight officer assigned to the Transit Hold Annex and who reports to Station Director, not to my research project, called me into his office to discuss what he described as anomalous personnel behavior in the East Wing corridor. He had reviewed the footage independently and identified the pattern I had identified, including Vethori Sorn's 0347 visit, and he wanted to know if my study had produced any explanatory framework for what he was looking at. I told him it had. He asked me to explain it. I told him that the human subject was, to the best of my current analysis, using genuine social bonds with contact staff as an automatic function of sustained proximity and honest engagement, and that those bonds were real and persistent, and were affecting staff behavior in measurable ways, and that this appeared to be a species-level trait and not an individual anomaly. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "So she is doing it on purpose?" I said no. I said that was the finding, and I needed him to hear it clearly, because the word "on purpose" implies a strategy and a choice. And what I was describing was neither. She was doing it the way she metabolized the morning infusion, continuously, automatically, as a function of what she was. He said, "That seems worse." I said, "Yes, I believe it is." He filed a security notation recommending increased contact restrictions and a review of the contact staff rotation policy. The station director read the notation and approved a review. The review was scheduled for the following month. It has not yet occurred. I sat with these 4 cases, and the 5th, for 2 days before I understood what I was looking at. Then I understood it, and I sat with it for another day before I could write it down cleanly. She had not recruited them. She had not targeted them, sequenced them, evaluated them for usefulness, or done anything that could be characterized as instrumental. She had simply been, in their presence, fully and genuinely present, interested in what they were interested in, candid about what she found interesting herself, willing to share what she knew, and curious about what they knew, warm in the specific way that does not require anything in return. And every one of them had responded to this the way, I eventually concluded, social animals respond when they encounter a member of their own kind who behaves exactly as a healthy member of that kind should behave. By moving toward them, by wanting to be near them again, by doing incrementally small things that made the other person's situation slightly better, not because they had been asked, and not because they expected a return, but because that is what you do for someone you have begun to regard as yours. She had bonded them. Not in a deliberate sense. in the sense that breathing is not deliberate, in the sense that a human who enters sustained proximity with another social being and engages with them honestly and with genuine attention cannot help but produce this effect, because the production of this effect is what their species' social architecture is designed to do. Humans form bonds the way their cardiovascular system circulates blood. It is not a strategy. It is a function, and the bonds are real. That is the part I need the board to hear clearly. These are not the surface-level social pleasantries that pass between strangers who share space and have learned to be civil to each other. These are not the instrumental alliances that form in competitive environments, where parties calculate mutual benefit. What Verathon felt for Rayavas by day 16 was, in every behavioral marker I have access to, structurally identical to what he felt for the colleagues he had worked alongside for years. What Sedovpalt felt was something closer to collegial affection, the particular warmth that forms between two people who have done real, intellectual work together and found each other good company in the doing. What Rovethseln felt, I think, was something simpler and in some ways more striking. He felt that she had taken his work seriously when no one else had, and he would remember that. None of them were compromised in any dramatic sense. None of them had passed her sensitive information. None of them had violated protocol in ways that endangered the facility. They were all, individually, still doing their jobs. Every one of them had begun, in small and deniable ways, to orient their behavior around her comfort and well-being. And every one of them would, she had asked them to do something that cost them something real, have had to work harder than they should have had to work, to say no. That is what the board asked me to quantify, and I have now quantified it. The effect is real, it is consistent, it is species level and not individual level, and it does not require any cooperation from the human. It requires only proximity and time. I will now address my own case. Between day 17 and day 38, I conducted 14 direct contact sessions with Voss. They averaged 61 minutes each. The longest was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I logged all of them. My research question going in, does she know she is doing it, was answered in the first session. The answer is no. Not in any meaningful sense. She knows, in the abstract, that she tends to find people interesting, and that people sometimes seem to find that pleasant. She knows that she has been told by various colleagues over the years that she is easy to talk to. She does not know, could not articulate, had never framed it in any terms that suggested she had tried to. That she's in sustained proximity with another social being, incapable of remaining neutral. That her interest is not a choice. That the warmth is not a performance. That when she looks at you with that particular quality of attention, the one I described earlier as the opposite of performance, it is because you have, in that moment, become something she genuinely wants to understand, and the wanting is not calculated, and not temporary, and not contingent on what you can do for her. She asked me, in our third session, how I had ended up in behavioral research. I told her that I had been interested in social architecture since my first-year coursework. The way different species build the structures that let them function as groups, and the way those structures either do or do not survive contact with other species' structures. She said that was the most interesting description of the field she had heard. She said most people described it as the study of how different beings get along, which was true but missed the structural element. The fact that social architecture is load-bearing, that it holds weight, that when two different structures meet, the question is not just whether they are compatible, but whether either of them can survive the contact. I said that was precisely it. She said she had thought about this a lot in her survey work, because field work in contact zones is essentially an ongoing experiment in whether your own social architecture can absorb the stresses of an environment it was not designed for, and what changes in you when it can and cannot. I asked what she meant by that. She talked for 22 minutes. I took notes, not because I needed to, my recordings were running, but because I wanted to, because I was thinking alongside her, and the notes helped me keep up. In our fourth session, 11 days after our first, she asked about the other staff. She did not ask about them with any particular urgency, and she did not ask in a way that could be characterized as probing for information. She asked the way you ask about people you have met and liked, and are curious about in an ordinary human way. She asked whether Orvith Gann had mentioned anything about his survey methodology coursework lately, because she had told him about a pre-registration system, use human archaeological fieldwork, that she thought he might find applicable to the kind of spatial survey work he was describing, and she hoped she had not overwhelmed him with it. She asked whether Setov-Palt's measurement schema submission had come back yet. She asked whether Rovoth Seln's parts request had been resolved. I told her, because the information was not sensitive, that Setov-Palt's submission had been accepted. She said quietly, "That was good." She said Setov-Palt was very rigorous and deserved the recognition. I noted that she had said the word deserved. Not that Setov-Palt was talented, not that the submission was good work, but that Setov-Palt deserved the outcome. The word carries a weight that I have some professional time with. It implies an investment in the other person's well-being that has become, in some sense, personal. You say deserved about someone you have, in some small way, taken ownership of. She had been in contact with Setov-Palt for a combined total of approximately 90 minutes. In our 7th session, I made a methodological error. I had been reviewing the cross-species bonding literature over the preceding 3 days. Specifically, the Vethori-Sorns secondary bonding incident had sent me into a comparative framework that I had been working through with some urgency. And I arrived at the session with a specific theoretical question about whether she experienced bonds with non-human species differently than bonds with humans. I asked it directly, without preamble, because I had been thinking about it and forgot for a moment that I was the researcher, and she was the subject. She did not mind. She considered it seriously. She said she didn't think she experienced them differently. Exactly. There was an asymmetry of reference. She had more shared context with humans, more of a common map, so conversation moved faster. The underlying quality of the connection was the same. If she cared about someone, she cared about them. The species was not the point. I asked, "And you do care about people here in this facility?" "Of course. They're good people. They've been kind to me under circumstances where they didn't have to be." I said, "They have acted in ways that benefited you because they care about you, not because they were required to." She said, "I know. I'm grateful for that." Said, "Do you understand why they care about you?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I try to deserve it." That single sentence she offered without drama, without self-consciousness, without any apparent awareness that it was extraordinary, stayed with me for 3 days. I wrote it in my session notes with no annotation, because I did not know what annotation to give it. A human in a detention facility, held under a bureaucratic ambiguity for 6 weeks, surrounded by beings whose language and physiology and social customs are substantially different from her own, asked why others have come to care for her, answering, "I try to deserve it," as though the appropriate response to receiving care is not to examine the mechanism, but to attempt to earn the outcome, as though care were something you could work toward rather than engineer. I believe this is the explanation for the entire phenomenon. Not in a reductive sense. The behavioral architecture is what it is. The bond formation is automatic. The data is the data. But the reason the bonds are real, the reason they are load-bearing, the reason they affect behavior in material ways and persist after the human's departure is that the human is not performing care. They are deploying it, without strategy, at everyone in proximity, because care is the mode they operate in. Because from inside that mode, the appropriate question is always, how do I deserve what I am receiving? And the answer to that question always involves attending more carefully to the person in front of you, which deepens the bond, deepens the care, which deepens the bond again, and the cycle has no designed terminal point, because humans did not build in a terminal point, and apparently did not notice that they hadn't. I am not going to recount every session to the board. To give you the structural finding, and then I am going to be honest about the personal one, because they are not separable. By day 28, my contact logs looked like Setov-Palt's. Extended sessions, topics well outside behavioral assessment protocol, a level of collaborative engagement that I would in any other context describe as collegial. By day 32, I had begun approaching her sessions Not with a structured question list, but with things I had encountered in my work that I found genuinely puzzling and wanted a second perspective on. By day 36, I was bringing her small things, not contraband, not protocol violations, nothing that would raise a flag on inspection, but the small accommodations that are technically within researcher discretion and that I was deploying in her favor. Session scheduling adjusted to align with her preferred working hours, a dietary notation passed to the food services queue, a note to Rovath Seln via the maintenance request system to prioritize the ventilation balance check for her wing. On day 38, I was writing my weekly session summary, and I paused in the middle of a sentence, and I read back what I had written, and I understood, with a specific clarity, that I had been approaching for 11 days, without quite arriving, exactly what had happened to me. She had not done anything to me. She had not targeted me. She had not identified me as a useful asset and applied a specific technique. She had simply been Ray Yavas, in my presence, consistently, across 14 sessions and approximately 1,000 combined minutes of contact. And I had been a social animal in the presence of another social animal who behaved the way a healthy member of a social species behaved, with genuine interest, genuine warmth, genuine willingness to engage. And I had responded exactly the way every social animal in this building had responded. I had moved toward her. I had begun to orient. I had started in small and deniable ways. Think about what would make her situation slightly better. She had bonded me. Not because she wanted to. Not because it served her purposes, though it did serve them incidentally, in the way that breathing serves your purposes. As a byproduct of something you cannot not do. She had bonded me because I had been in her proximity, and she had engaged with me honestly, and I had a social architecture that is, as all our social architectures are, responsive to exactly that kind of input. She had done the same thing to me that she had done to Verith On and Orvith Gan and Setov Palt and Rovath Seln, except that I had the behavioral literature to understand what I was experiencing, and the understanding did not make it stop. I wrote this in my session summary on day 38. I wrote it as clearly as I could. I filed in the study archive, and I sat for a while looking at the wall, and then I did something that Dova Seln had not done, and that I believe is the only reason I am standing before this board, rather than having filed a transfer request and left a sticky note. I went back and read every contact log from day 1 again, all of it. Verithon, Orvith Gan, Sethov Pult, Ravath Seln, my own. And I read Dovath Seln's logs, his full 14 days, not just the flagged entry. And I found, in the early entries, before the flags began, themes I had found in myself. The same slight extension of session time on his first contact. The same additional question, answered with more than the protocol required. The same quality of attention in his log writing when he described her. The same particular granularity of observation that you apply, without thinking about it, to things you find genuinely interesting. He had gotten to day 11. He had flagged Rovath Seln, and not the others. And he had understood, I think, exactly what was happening to him. And he had left. I understand why he left. I want to be plain about that. The correct professional response to recognizing that you are being affected by the subject of your study is to remove yourself from the study. That is not cowardice. That is methodology. He made the right call for himself and for the integrity of the data. Or he would have, if he had documented what he was experiencing before he left, rather than leaving a sticky note that said, "Proceed with caution." I stayed because the data required someone to stay. I stayed because Voss was going to be here for at least 2 more weeks pending provenance review, and someone was going to be in contact with her during that time. And if it was not me, it would be whoever was next on the roster, and that person would have no idea what they were walking into. I stayed because I had just understood something real about this species, and the understanding felt important enough to document fully, even at personal cost. And I want the board to know what that personal cost is, so that you understand the stakes of what I am reporting. I am not compromised in the sense that I would falsify data or obstruct a legitimate facility function on her behalf. My professional judgment is intact. I can give you this testimony. But I have been in sustained proximity with Rhea Voss for 25 days, and I have engaged with her honestly during that time, and she has engaged with me honestly in return, and the bond that is formed in those 25 days is structurally real. If you ask me to give a disposition recommendation for her transit hold, I will give you the one that the data and the legal framework support. But I want you to understand that giving you that recommendation will cost me something, and that cost is itself a data point. And that cost is precisely what every one of her contact staff has been quietly paying for the last 6 weeks in their small accumulated orientations toward her comfort, and that there are now 6 of us in this building who carry that weight and did not ask to and cannot set it down. She did not plan this. That is perhaps the most important sentence in this entire testimony. She did not come to this facility with a strategy. She did not identify targets. She did not exploit vulnerabilities. She sat at a desk in a transit hold and was interested in the people who came through her door and warmed toward them when they engaged with her. And in doing so, she produced, across 6 weeks, a functional loyalty structure in a secure containment facility, with 5 primary contact staff and 1 researcher, without issuing a single instruction or making a single request that could be characterized as coercive or even strategically motivated. There are 23 other facilities in the compact registry that have held human subjects for extended periods. I reviewed their personnel records before preparing this testimony. 20 of them filed anomalous personnel conduct reports within 60 days of human intake. The anomalies are distributed: minor protocol deviations, unexplained session overruns, undocumented supplementary accommodations provided to human detainees, researchers stepping back from studies, and citing scheduling conflicts. The records do not connect these events to a single cause. Why would they? Each event, looked at individually, is minor. A guard who took 6 extra minutes, a technician who brought a dietary supplement, a researcher who left without debriefing. I spent 2 days cross-referencing those records with the intake dates for each human subject at each facility. The correlation is not ambiguous. In every facility where a human was held for longer than 21 days, the anomalous conduct reports begin at approximately day 14 and escalate in frequency through day 30. The pattern is consistent regardless of facility type: research annex, transit hold, diplomatic secure accommodation, long-term medical study. It does not depend on the security level. It does not depend on the contact staff's prior experience with human subjects. It does not depend on whether the human subject was cooperative or non-cooperative, comfortable or distressed, communicative or withdrawn. The pattern holds across all 20 facilities with the same timeline and the same shape. The 3 facilities that did not file anomalous reports held their human subjects for fewer than 18 days. I believe that, had those subjects remained longer, the reports would have come. One of the 20 affected facilities, Vethori Containment Station Karat Geln, a high-security research installation, kept particularly detailed records. They had 4 human subjects across a 30-month period, held sequentially rather than concurrently, and they had the misfortune of assigning the same security rotation to 3 of the 4 intakes. The same guard technician appears in the anomalous conduct records for all 3. He is noted, in his annual performance reviews for the years in question, as an excellent officer with one persistent behavioral tendency that supervisors found difficult to formally address. He was, in their language, overly invested in detainee welfare outcomes in a way that impaired his objectivity. He received formal counseling twice. Neither instance changed his behavior in any meaningful way. The 4th human subject, held on a different rotation, generated anomalous records from a different guard technician who had no prior human contact at all. Conclusion I draw from this is not that this guard technician was uniquely susceptible. The conclusion is that he was exposed twice, and then 3 times, and by the 3rd time, the bond architecture was so established that corrective counseling was operating on something that counseling is not designed to address. He did not have a behavioral problem. He had a bond, and bonds are not corrected by counseling. They are carried. Looked at collectively, across 20 facilities and several hundred contact staff, the data describes a consistent pattern that I will characterize as clearly as I know how. Humans bond everyone they are in sustained proximity with. They do this automatically, continuously, and with no apparent upper limit. on the number of bonds they can maintain or initiate. The bonds they form are real, structurally real, load-bearing, affecting the behavior of the bonded party in material ways, and they do not degrade. The human's departure. Vethori. 11 days after I rotated him off direct contact with Voss per my corrective protocol, still checks the humidity sensor in her wings corridor during his shift. He does not know why. He says it has become a habit. Orvithgan still sets aside the evening grain substitutes that Voss's dietary note specified, detainee who has been moved to a different service sector. He says he is not sure why he keeps doing it. Sethov Palt, who has not had authorized contact with Voss since day 22, submitted a research paper last week with Voss acknowledged in the footnotes as a collaborative contributor. She said it was only appropriate. The bonds do not require the human's continued presence to function. They are installed. I want to address one question I expect the board to raise before it is raised. The question is she doing this consciously? Is this a deliberate capability, a trained skill, a tactical deployment? I have answered this once already, but I want to answer it more fully, because it matters. My assessment, based on 25 days of direct contact and a comprehensive review of all available behavioral data, is that the answer is no, and that the answer being no is what makes this a species-level finding and not an individual one. She is not a particularly skilled operator who has been trained in social engineering techniques. She is not unusual among her species, far as the literature suggests. She is a survey coordinator who likes her work and finds people interesting, and is warm toward them in the way that healthy members of her species are warm toward the people they know. The trait I am reporting is not an aberration. It is the baseline. Every human who comes to this facility, or any ship, or any contact environment where sustained proximity with other social beings occurs, will do this. Not because they have been trained to, not because they are trying to, because they are human, and this is what humans do, and they will do it to everyone they encounter in that environment, with exactly the same consistency, the same depth, and the same permanent effect that Rhea Voss has produced in this annex over the past 6 weeks. I asked her, on day 40, whether she was aware that the people around her tended to become fond of her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm aware that I get attached to people pretty easily, and I hope that's reciprocal, but I try not to assume." I said, "Do you do anything to cultivate that?" she said. "I try to actually listen. I to pay attention to what people are interested in and ask about it. Try to remember things. I don't know if that's cultivation exactly. It's just, it seems rude not to. People are interesting. Why wouldn't you want to know about them?" She said it simply. No self-consciousness, no pride. The way you describe something you find so natural that framing it as a skill had simply not occurred to you. I said, "Does it work on everyone?" She said, with a slight smile that I have now spent considerable professional energy learning to not find as interesting as I find it. "It doesn't always work right away, but I've never met anyone who wasn't worth the time." Closed my session notes on that line, and I have not added to them since, because there is nothing more I need to understand about what I am dealing with, and adding more would be a way of spending time near her when I no longer have a methodological justification for doing so. And I am a rigorous enough scientist to know when I am rationalizing. The board should know that the provenance review for Voss's detained materials has concluded. The materials have been cleared. She is authorized for release as of yesterday. I have prepared the release documentation. I have also prepared 2 other documents. The first is the full study report, which will be filed with the Vethori Interspecies Behavioral Institute, and which I recommend be distributed to all facilities operating under long-term human contact protocols. The second is a personnel welfare guidance note for facility administrators. Recommends the following. Contact rotations of no longer than 14 days for any staff member in regular contact with a human detainee or resident. Mandatory debrief sessions for all contact staff following human custody periods. And a formal recognition that anomalous conduct reports filed during or following human contact periods should be reviewed under a behavioral bonding framework before any disciplinary action is taken against the affected staff member. Vethori is not a security risk. He is a guard who checked a humidity sensor a few extra times, because a human woman found his work interesting and said so, and meant it. Orvith Gann is not a protocol violator. He is a 22-year-old technician who found someone who took his coursework seriously, first time in his professional life, and responded to that the way any social animal responds to being genuinely seen. They did not fail. They were affected. There is a difference, and I would like the board to make that difference legible in formal policy before the next human comes. Intake. The review board has asked me to provide my formal disposition recommendation for Voss now that her materials have been cleared. My formal recommendation is immediate release with full diplomatic courtesy protocols applied, and a note on her transit record that she is a cooperative, non-coercive subject with no security findings against her. That is my professional recommendation, based on the legal and evidentiary record. I will also tell you, cause you have asked my complete testimony, and I have committed to giving it, that I stood in the intake lobby this morning and watched her collect her data archive and her cleared materials, and that when she turned and saw me, she said my name, just my name, no other salutation, in a way that I will carry for longer than I would prefer, and that she said it was good work, what I was doing, and she hoped the study would be useful. I said I believed it would be. She said, that slight smile. Tell Veratholon the humidity reading in the east corridor has been stable for 11 days. He'll want to know. Then she walked out. I have told Veratholon. He said he would update the maintenance queue note. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said, she was a good one, wasn't she? I said yes, I said she was. That response is not in my formal report. I am including it here because it is true. And because the board should understand that this is what 6 weeks of contact produces. And that there is nothing in our behavioral literature that tells us how to make it stop, and that the next human through that door will produce the same result, in the same time frame, with the same permanent effect, without trying, without knowing, simply by being what they are. That is my testimony. I recommend the study be classified priority research, distributed facility-wide, and escalated to the Compact Behavioral Council for Interspecies Advisory Review. I have no further remarks at this time.